I'd yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for such time.
Look, we've been down this path somewhat exhaustively, except we haven't held exhaustive hearings to bring in the stakeholders, poke at this idea, see if there are alternatives and other ways to make the FAA into a more efficient agency. Actually, the Canadians are not launching a satellite. They're, putting a module on a satellite, and they are allowing people to actually license in or lease in with them, which the FAA could do. That's not the critical part of the infrastructure we need here in the U.S. That satellite-based system will not be able to improve the ground-based system that we have here in terms of our very, very busy airports. We land more planes in a day at LaGuardia than Canada lands in I don't know how many days. So the issue of our system and more efficiency in our system depends on many things, including one thing which is a glaring omission in both the House and Senate bills: runways, aprons, terminals. Guess what? Both the House bill and the Senate bill stiff the airports. We haven't allowed them to assess a reasonable increase in the passenger facility charge in many, many, many years. So even if this system becomes more efficient one way or another, at some point you can't. Right now, you can't get more planes into LaGuardia without building another runway. That's not going to happen. So we can't even talk about that. But there are other places where we could improve efficiency with another runway, where you could improve efficiency with more terminal space, more gates, more apron, and yet the airports are not being allowed to assess a user fee to get there. I actually was an original advocate for the passenger facility charge many years ago when I saw the unfairness of the previous system. That is, I live in Springfield, Oregon, across the river from Eugene. Eugene has the airport on their property. They had to bond, to build a new airport, and they could only assess the fees in taxes against the people of Eugene. Yet people from Corvallis, people from Springfield, people from Roseburg, we all use that airport. So I thought it would be only fair to assess a passenger facility charge for those sorts of improvements, which I probably enjoy more than most people, flying more than most people. But we haven't allowed an increase in that, and certainly the costs of construction have not gotten any cheaper. And the airports, many of them are bonded out. They don't have the capability of issuing more bonds without more revenue flow. But we seem to be ignoring that. So if you want to look at the system to increase efficiency as a whole and to help the passenger experience, you've got to look at the system as a whole. I'm afraid we're a little bit short there. But just back to this, to the corporate model. We don't know what the user fees will be, which again is why business aviation, general aviation, the nation's largest airline and the regional airlines, which fly 62% of the airplanes every day, are all opposed to this black hole. It's suddenly we're going to have a private corporation that assesses some sort of user fee, which is raising more than $10 billion a year to pay for itself. And then the gentleman says that safety will remain with the FAA. It will, with no funding. So it's a crisis that every once in a while, idiots take over and we shut down the government, and that messes up air traffic control, and then we go into sequestration. But it's okay if they shut down every inspector in the FAA and everything else that goes into safety in the FAA and everything that goes into certification at the FAA, because that will all remain with the vestigial agency over in the general fund with no funding source, because the assumption is all of the existing excise taxes are going to be repealed and replaced by new unknown user fees by the private entity. So what's that new system, and how and where is the money going to come from for safety, for certification, and all the other critical functions at the FAA. That's left to the total discretion of Congress with no funding source. At least today, you can look at that and say, well, hell, we're paying for 93% of it through taxes that are being raised that are dedicated. All we got to do is come up with 7. But now it'll be, wow, we got to come up with 100% to fund those inspectors and those certifiers and all those people over there. Wow, this is great. Let's bifurcate the agency. Plus the communications problems. And by the way, the certifiers will have to certify the new systems that the private corporation is proposing to put in place. So the certifiers are now laid off because of a dumb government shutdown, but hey, they can move ahead over here. Well, no, they can't move ahead. They can't deploy any new systems because they've got, they are user fee based, and these people over here are general fund based. So I do not believe this solves the problem. I think it would be better to say, if you want to do this, do it the way President Clinton did propose, which is a government corporation. He did not propose privatization. And virtually the vast majority of countries in the world have gone with government corporations. If you do that, you don't have some of the bizarre problems that they're trying to work around here. The Constitution, which prohibits giving regulatory authority to a private entity, well, they work around that by saying everything the corporation wants to do has to be approved by the secretary, who, by the way, will have a giant new office of experts to advise him or her on whether or not to approve the new fee structure, whether or not to approve the new routes, whether or not to approve this or that, or anything that is regulatory in nature. That all still has to go back to the secretary, who, by the way, is subject to Congress and the appropriations process and political appointment. We aren't solving the problem. If this goes forward, you're not solving the problem. I posit that you're creating more. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman